right. So this is the Afterburn. So if you have comments and questions, you can come on up here. All right? All right, we'll begin with Heather.
Okay, so my question is kind of a twofold question. Chapter 1, verse 7 through 9. In Christianity, these were some very foundational verses that we heard a lot, and also kind of instructing us also that, we didn't need the sacrifices. So with Rebbitzon's teaching last night in Selena, I think they go really well together. Because we're not reading about the sacrifices here, and it's not listed as something that you also have to do, it doesn't mean that it wasn't required, right? Just because it's left out. Is it something where it's just automatically assumed, like how Yeshua doesn't talk about what to eat and what not to eat because it's automatically assumed?
Right.
Is that what we should understand that here?
Sure. Let me I'm glad you asked the question. So look, the obsession in the Christian churches is this idea of the blood, okay? The blood of Messiah, okay? They almost have a kind of sick, perverse sort of way that they get about blood, okay? And they see splattered over T-shirts, and it's just, I don't know what they do that with. But here what you have to understand is the idea that this cleanses, which is something the sacrificial system never did. By the way, the sacrificial system did forgive sin. It says it absolutely in the Tanakh that your sins would be forgiven when you made the offerings and you did the sacrifices. What he's saying here, though, is that you still need to have cleansing. And the cleansing is provided by Yeshua. And so that his blood does something the sacrifices never would or could do. So this is not substituting or negating in any way, which is what you were asking about, even though it's not mentioned here. But just so you know, all the apostles kept going to the temple till there was no temple. They kept doing all the offerings that were required as required. And so that, did not change. By the way, even Yeshua himself, when he cleansed the lepers, he sent them to go show themselves to the priest. He said, keep the Torah. I mean, he knew what the Torah was and told them to do what they had to do. And so let's just keep that in mind. Okay, what else?
So in that also, and listening to Rebbitzon last night about the sacrifices, I kind of feel like we're such at a really big disadvantage because we just truly don't understand what that is like to bring sacrifices. And even the part about, and women would have to do this too. I mean, your husband wouldn't, or your father, they wouldn't go on your behalf, would they? Women would have to go and offer their own sacrifices. Like with the bird, that one really got me. You had to clean the gullet out yourself and crack its back yourself. I just feel like we're missing out because we don't get to do those things. Should we be mourning? Should we be mourning the temple like the Jews mourn the temple? It makes me think of Tish B'Av. Am I saying that right?
Tisha B'Av.
Yeah, I did some study on that, and I feel like we should be longing for that also, like we long for Messiah. Should we be longing for these opportunities to participate in these actual sacrifices?
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily put it that way. What I would say is this. The sacrificial system, which we didn't talk about last night, so we'll talk about it here, it brought about two very powerful things. Okay, number one, you were dealing with, when you do things you shouldn't do, there's a death that was coming. So it brings you in direct face-to-face with cause and effect, and that effect being death, because something needed to die. That something would have been you, right? So you're bringing a sacrifice. The second thing that's very powerful out of this is to see and understand the cost. If you're married and you're in a tight budget and your spouse, whichever one of you goes out and all of a sudden spends, $500 on something, you would have a meltdown. What do you mean you went out and bought that? We're broke, we can't afford that. Well, guess what? You start making mistakes that cost you a bull, you might have a discussion at home that causes that to fix. because people don't understand the cost of this. Okay, this is the extreme version, or much larger version of, some of you had this, I had this in my house where my father had a jar. You did certain things, you had to put something in the jar. Or you said certain things or whatever, there was a penalty and it cost you money, and you put money in the jar every time you did that thing that he wanted you to stop doing. After a while, you realize how expensive that would get and you start to fix the problem. And so there was two aspects to the temple that were very powerful. One was obviously having to deal with death, and the other being cost. And so I think those are things that we would greatly benefit from, just like you were kind of alluding to there. So I'm not so sure I would say that we should be longing for, because it'd be great if we could figure this stuff out without needing that, because we shouldn't need that to figure it out. But sometimes the more face-to-face reality of seeing it, observing it, handling it, and doing it brings the message home a little more powerfully, okay?
So last year, you kind of touched a little bit that maybe that you would do a little bit more of a study or something about Tish B'Av.
No, I have one. I just didn't teach it.
Okay, I look forward to that.
Okay, well, what my problem is that I get to Av, and it's like I haven't figured out which Sabbath is close enough, and I didn't plan for it. So I'll try to, when we get to the summer and we get to the month of Av, Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av. Historically, this is when the spies came back and brought an evil report. It's when both temples were destroyed. It's just like the saddest day of the year. So I do have something for that, and I can bring it out this year. I'll plan to be ready for that. But I already have a teaching for that I've done before. Okay, Ashley.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
First and foremost, I want to praise and apologize you for earlier. I'm learning to check myself as quick as possible, but apparently I'm still not quick enough. So on that, though, that was, I really enjoyed this teaching, because that moment was like the entire teaching for me. So thank you. I wanted to ask about correctiveness, because I never grew up being corrected. I don't think, not even once. I think you're actually probably the first person. How do I, regarding raising children, how do you know when enough is enough and when something's not too much? What's the healthy balance?
Okay, so the cornerstone, of correction, the cornerstone that has to be there is effectiveness. So when you're asking things like too much, there isn't anything as too much unless you're doing something that's not effective. So you keep doing more and more of it, expecting it to be effective, instead of changing your approach to try something that might be more effective. So if you're doing anything that you think may be too much, well, that's because you're doing something that's not working. So you need to try and find a different approach that may work better. Does that make sense? Okay? So somebody may spank their child. I know this is like, oh my gosh, in 23 now, but okay? But if a spanking doesn't work, then hitting them more isn't gonna work. Okay? In other words, if you try something and it's not working, doing more of it isn't necessarily gonna work. So why would you just do more of it? So when you're asking, well, how much is too much? It's not about how much is too much. What is actually effective? Now, by the way, there are children that nothing's effective with. So then you simply have to keep them from doing, or minimize their ability to get to do the things that are really problematic, because they're just not gonna be, disciplined. And those are children that are gonna have a real hard time in life. Okay, because they'll never have that discipline, and they're just gonna be running all over the place all the time. But when you say what's too much and what's enough, what does it take to be effective? In other words, to get the response you're looking for, which is their behavior to alter. Okay, so you're looking to alter behavior. And that can be done, by the way, with some children in certain situations through a conversation and an appeal to them to think about what they're doing. And other times, it takes more extreme punishments of taking things away from them or whatever and making them suffer a little bit. There's no one size fits all for everybody. What drives me crazy is watching the parents do nothing. Do nothing. And their child is all over the map here in the congregation, screaming or running, and they do nothing. And everybody else sees what's happening. I don't know how they don't see. I guess they've seen it so much they just ignore it now. It just becomes noise. But they do nothing. We've had this one lady in the congregation years ago. She was a young new mother, and her child, I don't think, ever heard a coarse word or a no. And that child was horrendous. in terms of being a spoiled little brat. And I kept looking at her like, pick up your child, take her out of the room, and discipline them. I don't care what you do, but don't let this behavior continue here, disturbing everybody else. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do in terms of when you go to discipline them. I don't know what will work on your child, okay? Ashley.
The other question I had was in regarding checking yourself. I probably asked this before. I feel like I did. How do I get better at being more quicker and not letting things go out before I can? Basically, how do I stop talking as fast as I can think? You know what I'm trying to say?
Sure, okay. Sure. I was thinking first before I was speaking. Do something fairly extreme, okay? And I tell this story occasionally. You know, there was a naturopathic guy I went to once years ago, and I swear that he did actually think through everything he said before he said it. So he would sometimes pause, I'm talking like minutes, before saying something. So if you said something to him, he wouldn't just respond back. He'd look at you, and I know he's parsing every word, and then he would say what he wanted to say after he thought it through. So do that in the extreme. Slow down, but tell everybody around you that's what you're doing so that they're not wondering, what are you doing? Because you're just staring at them, okay? But literally force yourself to pause before speaking. And then once you can develop that habit, then you can speed that up a little bit, where at least you're still being more aware of what you're going to say before you say it. But learn to stop and pause. And so if you want to respond, say to somebody, okay, I have it, I'm going to respond, give me a second. Think it through, what you want to say. Take it to the extreme. Okay? Listen, try it. All right. Mr. Pete.
Thank you, Rabbi. So if sin is missing the mark, I guess not hitting the target or not hitting the bullseye, to some degree that's failure. And is all failure to some extent sin if it involves from a shortcoming in the relationship? In other words, if I have not met up to my wife's expectations or my employer's expectations or my family's expectations by some conduct of mine, that's a failure in the relationship. But I guess what troubles me about it, sometimes despite our best efforts, we fail and we sin. And I guess with a relationship with another human, that just results in the end of that relationship. But my concern is if we think we're putting our best efforts in our relationship with the Father, how do we know if we're hitting the bullseye, hitting the target at all? Isn't it easy to delude yourself in how you conduct yourself every day to think that you're hitting the mark, but you're not? How do we check that? Because if I want to check my relationship with another human being, I'll say, are we okay? How are we doing? Is anything I'm not doing that I should? But I don't know how we do that with the Father.
All right, so this is a good question. So look, the thing is, all relationships, as I said earlier, have expectations, whether or not they were discussed or not, right? And I would use the word disappointment rather than failure. It's disappointing when the breaches happen. Now, if you make no effort to fix it, then we end up in like a place called failure, okay? Because we can get soft and neglectful and distracted, and we can do something that disappoints the other person in the relationship. I wouldn't call that failure. I would just say simply through complacency, distraction, or some other thing, or just weakness and giving into some other desire, we did something that breached the relationship. Now, over time, you will learn what does that, what disappoints the other person, okay? Even if you have formal discussions of setting expectations, not everything gets discussed necessarily, but over time, if you're seeing, hearing, observing, and handling, you should figure out, hey, when I do this, that really disappoints my wife. And when she does that, she should figure out it really disappoints me. Well, the Father's a lot simpler than that, because he literally tells us, do these things, don't do those things. And it's much more simplistically black and white. Now, where it gets less black and white is when Yeshua takes it to the deeper spiritual level of the intent behind it. So if you don't commit adultery, but you wanted to, you're still in trouble. And again, it's still relatively simplistically black and white. You know whether or not you wanted to do something, even if you didn't do it. So there's a very, huge amount of objectivity that's there. Now, other relationships get much more subjective because we really don't know what the other person expects, especially early on in a relationship, especially if we didn't ever talk about it, okay? And so, and even if we talk about it, we may cover it, well, I expect this and this, and we didn't talk about how that should look, though, because now you think you're meeting my expectation, but I didn't give you enough detail, and you're really not. So that's also part of what needs to be handled is those clarities, which is why Abba is so detailed in the word of what he expects, all right? How he expects us to treat each other. And really, it ultimately is going to come down to Deuteronomy 8:2, that you're demonstrating that it's in your heart to make the effort. Now, you can't truly make the effort if you're not aware, as John points out, and other places point out, that we have a challenge in our internal mechanisms called the flesh. The flesh can blind us. The flesh can cause all kinds of problems for our ability to see straight. And so our awareness of it gives us a possibility of not being blinded, of starting to objectively notice when that's popping up. Okay? Now, we have feedback loops. Okay, we have wonderful feedback loops. When you breach, something usually smacks you to let you know you breached. Okay, you breach with a friend, the friend's going to treat you a little different. You breach with the wife or a husband, a child, it doesn't matter, or your boss, there's going to be feedback. That's when you have to ask yourself, how did I miss this? What was going on? I thought we were good. And then you'll start to figure out where you went wrong in your attitude, your thinking, your observation, your complacency, whatever it was. Okay, you're lusting after something because a desire blinded you to something that you should have known would be a problem. Then you go back and you analyze and you learn more about yourself that way. As you're learning what messes them up or disappoints them and breaches with them, you're also learning about yourself to understand how you ended up there. Because a lot of husbands and wives come to me and they're counseling going, well, I don't know how we ended up here, but we're not liking each other right now. Yeah, you do. You know how you ended up there. You just need somebody to help you walk through all of that, okay? And so the more you can do, the most critical part of this, which is look at you and not them or the situation, but look at you to figure out what happened. Don't look at outside things, but try to figure out what was in you. Okay? That will help very much. Did that answer your question, Pete? All right, good. All right, Janet.
So I appreciate that question because my question is very related to that. So like yesterday, Rabbi Sin was talking about the sin offering for the things that we did unintentionally, but where it was against Torah.
Right.
So, do you think that? Okay, so we're absorbing Torah. So obviously, the Ruach is reminding us of the right way, right to go.
Yeah.
And so, do you think that Abba gave us kind of like an internal mechanism to? Like the conscience, like something that will tell us if we don't have the shalom or the peace that we're probably off base. Should we even look at that as a way to kind of start to examine? We should be examining ourselves. You told us that yesterday, but I always have that struggle. So is that part of what we should be hearing along with the Ruach, like trying to bring to remembrance? Or come to counseling if we're not sure of an area, where we're not sure if it's actually a breach of the relationship.
All right. So you came to the right conclusion at the end of all that. Okay? You need to counsel. But let me explain the other two parts to it. Yes and no. Yes meaning yes, there should be and can be often a pricking of your conscience that gets your attention to realize maybe something's wrong. But also, that could be a false indicator because it could be something that's coming out of your desire and you're getting this sort of feeling because it's messing with what you really want as opposed to the truth. So you have to be really careful with that, which is why counseling is really the answer when you're not sure. Because yes, you can certainly feel guilty and this and that and everything else, but I know people that feel guilty and all that stuff for not doing stuff that breaches. Well, I feel bad that I didn't go to mom's Christmas dinner, and I feel bad that, well, that's your conscience, yes, making you feel bad, but not necessarily for the right reasons. So my answer is yes, but no. And so when you're not sure which way it is, counsel. I was feeling my conscience was really kind of convicting me about this thing. Let me ask your opinion on it so I can find out if this is my conscience from a sort of still small voice point of view or from my own point of view. Okay? All right. Because there are things in life that are going to make you uncomfortable just because it's you that's uncomfortable. It has nothing to do with Yahweh. It just has to do with you. It's just not congruent with you, and so that's a part of your conscience, so to speak, okay? All right. Grayson.
So in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, when it references not loving the world or things in the world, what does that look like for us today? And is it possible to love and show love to people in the world, or would that fall under the category of loving the world?
Okay, so I painted you a picture that if you guys would take the picture, this would be a simple answer, right? There's two, I don't know what the right word is, there's two places, okay? There's the above and the below. That's the entire universe basically falls into the above and the below, all right? He's saying don't love the things of the below, the fleshly things, the worldly things. Those are the things that do not match with the above. Now, there are things of the above that exist in the below, and you can still love them. We do things in the below. We bring the above into the below. He injects some of the above in the below. So what we're talking about is, when he says, do not love the world and those things of the world, those are the things that are not lined up with the above, okay? So if you have things happening you can come to services and have the best time and love it because that's the above existing in the below, okay? So let's make sure we have that part first. So simply ask yourself, is this something that's congruent with the above that happens to also be down here? If the answer is no, you're not to love that. You're not to desire that because it doesn't match up. Now, as far as people, he loves all people, so should you. You may not love everything they're doing. You might not like everything they're doing. You may not approve of everything they're doing, but they're people. They're people that hopefully you will be related to in the kingdom, all being brothers and sisters all together as he pops their bubbles whenever he does, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, I have a lot of friends that are not in this walk, okay? I'm not very close to them at this point. I don't talk to them very often because we're not on the same page. But if they ever called me up, I would be very friendly. I would remember very warmly the relationship that we've had over the last 40 or 50 years that I've known them, all right? And I would care that and hope that one day they would be on the same page in covenant with the Father. That being said, I'm not letting them draw me into conversations and bringing me back into places that was world, not above. Okay, that was not heavenly, but it was worldly and fleshly. And so, because sometimes you get into those reminiscences and the next thing you know, you're looking back fondly on the dumb things you did. While you're laughing your off, having a great time. And then you never know, that's subconsciously kind of planting the seed of, I missed that. And that's where you'd be in a problem with the idea of loving the world or desiring the things of the world. Did that answer your question? All right, good. All right, Ashley's back.
Sorry, I had another thought when Janet came up. With the whole correctness thing, especially coming from you, I just want to make sure I get this right, because I look at you like try to look, because you're like, okay, thank you, you understand. When you correct me, you're doing it because you care and you see that we can make it to the kingdom, and it's basically like you're trying to keep us safe from running into a car, so you yank us and move us out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Look, that's where all correction should come from, which is why you should never take correction from anybody that doesn't love you, okay? Why would you take correction from anybody that doesn't have enough of a relationship with you that you know that it's coming from a right place of wanting to keep you safe, all right? Correction is all about you being safe. Because if I don't correct you, you're going to keep doing it. If you keep doing it, you won't be safe. You're going to do something that's going to train wreck your life in some way, all right? So the correction is all about, keeping you out of trouble. Now, if the person doesn't, have enough of a relationship with you and care enough about you, then why would you take any correction from them? Okay? All right.
Okay, so bear with me. I feel like my head is like all over the place with some of this. But like the very beginning of this, from like the first 3 verses from 1 John 1, are we supposed to like be able to relate to that, or is this just a prophet thing?
The first 3 verses?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Esther, look, the thing is, he wants us to relate to the first verse, as I told everybody, because we have seen, and we have heard, and we have observed, looked upon, and we have handled. So that we should relate to. And then, well, this is always concerning the Word, the Torah, the truth, the Messiah. The second verse is talking about that through that we realized that there was a life that was manifested, not just his life, but a life we could all have. That life itself was manifested to us so we could see what life could be and should be. So we should relate to that. And then as far as announcing, okay, announcing is what he's doing, and certainly we're not required to go out there and proselytize, etc., like the church would teach you, but we demonstrate through our light shining as we walk it out. All right?
Okay, I'll get a little personal. Pre-Torah, this is the weekend. I think my nephew turns 5 on the 27th, so this was the Shabbat that my eyes were opened when I came down here for the first time. So following that, these 5 years have been that for me. I feel like that I've seen, I've tasted commitment, like I went 100% in. And then, so knowing my personality before this was like carefree, happy, and I am, but the following verses, so your joy may be complete. So there's kind of a struggle with it because my eyes have been opened. I've been walking this journey. I feel like I see everything. I feel like the Father has let me be in the world, living in the world, running forward, running the race, putting everything I have into it, but I see so much going on in my day-to-day, in my life, with our mishpachah. And it's just like, the only thing I know is fake joy from the world of the life that I had before.
Right.
The only thing that I have a connection with when it comes to that is the yellow prior to my bubble being popped. So
right.
It was like, oh, thank you. I'm good. Okay, I promise. I don't know. I don't like getting personal because I get like this and it's not. So anyway, so how do I reconcile as a yellow prior to, because I feel like I've lost myself. I feel like I've lost that part of me, and I have a yellow-red, and that's really difficult for me because it's goal-oriented, directed. I have structure and order in which I never lived my life like that before. I was very carefree, on a whim, spontaneous, no structure, no order. I forced myself in the military so I could have some sense of structure, but still, I had my independence. I didn't care about what my parents were doing. Like in Torah, I was like, that's for you guys. I'm happy. Go lucky, non-bubble popped, boom, you did it. And you're just like, boom, there goes my whole thing. And then now I'm like, what is actual, and I've listened to, I maybe need to revisit that Rejoice old one they have on podcast, or this joy, how do you continue, how does that look like in this walk of having that joy complete? Because is it thankfulness? Because I'm thankful I would never want to go back to that. I don't lust after that life or the world. But is it, I don't know, this joy of having a hard time understanding because,
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Look, you're just out of luck.
I knew it.
No. You were getting too serious there for a second. Okay, look, listen. Listen. First of all, okay, you have him saying here, I write this to you, right? So that you do not sin. He's also saying, I write this to you so that your joy is complete. I write this. He's not writing just that little piece for that. You have to read, the whole letter is there for this point. He's writing the whole letter so that we understand that we can have a more full joy. But it has to be in the perspective of everything he's trying to tell us, and that being mostly the idea that walking this out brings the fullness of joy ultimately that we've been hoping for, not while we're in the middle of it. I don't think that, Paul felt full joy every time he got shipwrecked and beat up and arrested and everything else that happened to him. But yet, when we look at it from James's perspective, joy in a trial is a choice. But the only reason you can have joy in a trial is because you know that it brings something later. It's what it's coming that we're experiencing. So he's saying as you're going through all of this in 1 John, all of this is worth it because it brings the life that brings the joy and no more tears and all that kind of things. Right now, we're kind of stuck doing this in the world. In but not of, right? And so he's saying, I'm doing this so that if you can focus on these things in the right perspective, you might have a whole lot more joy than you would otherwise trying to do this in this crummy world that we're in. And that's really the key, is understanding it from that perspective and knowing that it's still a choice. You have to choose joy, okay? And so, because otherwise, how could you have joy in a trial? All the fruit of the Spirit are choices, not just because you have the Spirit now, you automatically have these things. You can't just love your enemy. You have to choose to love your enemy. You have to choose to have joy in trials, right? You have to choose to have patience in places where it makes no sense to try to have patience, okay? Does that answer the question? Does that make sense then?
No, that's perfectly, because, it makes sense because, before I didn't choose that. I was just living like that. And it's active in this walk, and everything else is, so duh. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Look, the idea of being carefree, all right? We should never be carefree. We just have to be more aware of what we should be caring about. And there's a certain freedom in caring about the right things and not worrying about the other things, okay? So carefree basically just means that the person's just floating through life, not aware or paying attention to anything that's actually important or any of that kind of stuff. And so you end up in all kinds of problems when you run around that carefree because you're not paying attention. So we are supposed to care about, but in caring about the right things and not caring about the wrong things, there's a lot of freedom from the stress, from the strain, from the worry, from the doubt, from the fear, and all those other things. So essentially, that makes you carefree, if you want to put it in the right perspective, okay? Because you should be floating around without a concern, whatever the world is doing, because you're on the right path that leads to the right place. No matter what's falling around your ears, you're on the right path, going to the right place, okay? You're welcome.
I also have another one for the chapter 2:11.
Yeah.
If I can do another one. Okay. It says, he who hates his brothers in darkness and walks in the darkness. And I know that you taught about, setting boundaries when people are in breach and how, it's without the expectation. How would they know? How do you balance the boundary and completely canceling? With love, but I don't know how is there a balance between I'm protecting myself, and love and the door always open, but what I end up running into with this is it hate? Is it hate, or is it a lust of pride in the next verse where it's just
that'll take counseling to dig under. One of the things we do in counseling is figure out what's motivating stuff. So I don't know, if you're not sure what's motivating it, then you probably can counsel about it. We can kind of sort it through. I'll ask you some questions that'll, kind of dig under and try to figure out what's doing it. But let's understand that there are people that are toxic in your life because they're in breach, because they're in darkness, because of whatever, and you probably need to put them at arm's length at least. It's not the idea of canceling them. If they were to change and be less toxic, you would have a door that would be open enough to give that an opportunity. But there are some people that are kept at a little bit of arm's length where you have some more interaction with them, but limited. There's some that you keep at enough distance where you're not interacting with them at all at this point because of the nature of the darkness or the breach or whatever that's going on in that relationship, okay, the toxicity of that relationship. So it's all going to be, relationship specific or situationally specific to that, all right? So as far as canceling, if you're thinking about canceling, then you may have some other hate, other issues where you really don't like the person and you still have anger, bitterness, you haven't forgiven fully, let go of those negative emotions, where you're like, I'm done with that person, as opposed to saying, that person I don't need in my life right now. Because who they are right now and who I am right now, that's not good. That's different, though, than saying, I hate you, that person's this, that. Now we're judging them, which is not our job to do. Okay, as opposed to identifying, I'm better off here with them not here with me, or me not being there with them, okay? Not interacting in whatever level, okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, live stream.
From Joseph Neal, Rabbi, would I be correct in connecting 1 John 2:16 with Genesis 3:6?
Yes. I mean, this is essentially what Chava was dealing with when she saw the fruit and made some decisions based on it, where she said that, it was good for food. It says she saw the tree, it was good for food, it's pleasant to the eyes, desirable to make one wise, etc. This is exactly what these kinds of things that it's talking about in Genesis 3:6. All right?
Okay, from M. Abraham Nixon, would it be fair comparison with 1 John 2:11 to Deuteronomy 28:29 that unforgiveness/hating a brother is not only breaking Torah, but also almost like a curse on your walk?
Right. I believe 28:29 talks about groping around at midday like it's like you're a blind person. Is that right? Let me just make sure. Yes. Okay? It says, you shall be groping at noon as a blind man gropes in darkness and not prosper in your ways. So yeah, that's a good connection. That's a fair connection. As a matter of fact, I almost mentioned it, okay? Because it talks about the idea of being blinded by these things. And so yes. Next.
From Yolanda A. Rabbi, in 1 John 2:9, when John speaks of hating your brother, is it just your brother in covenant, or does it also apply to your related brothers or someone you consider a brother that is not in covenant?
No, I think the way I described it is hate is a problem, period. Okay? Hate is not an emotion you should be holding on to or having. Okay? You hate, you need to fix that. Okay? You can recognize that something's not good for you, and you can create a distance with that, but hate. You can hate the behavior, don't hate the person. Okay? So somebody's doing some sort of behavior that really, puts you in a bad place or treats you in a bad way, you can really not have any kind of positive thoughts about the behavior, but just don't point the finger at the person. That person can, and hopefully will, turn around at some point. Not everybody does, but a lot of them hopefully do. And so let's not hate, and this doesn't mean just your brother, meaning who's in the covenant, anybody. I wouldn't hate anybody. I might not like a whole lot of people, okay? And that means that I may not want to spend a whole lot of time with them, but I'm not going to hate them, because hating them is judgment. Okay, I've now judged them in some sort of way. As opposed to using judgment to say, or discernment to say, I don't like what they're doing, I probably don't want to interact with that right now. I'm not judging them, they are where they are because of what they've experienced and what their whole thing is, and that's whatever their path is, and prayerfully hoping that will turn around. All right, next.
Okay, from line upon line for today, Rabbi, in 1 John 2, verses 8 through 11, what exactly was the fresh command or the refreshed command?
No, I mean, what he's saying is, again, I write you a fresh command, or he says, I write you no fresh command. Look, he's saying, look, I'm the first 7, I already told you what that was, and again, you might have to go back and line upon line, go back and listen again upon listen. I don't know what to do with that, okay? But I said in verse 7, this goes all the way back to Genesis. This is a command that goes all the way back to the beginning. So I'm not giving you anything new. Covenant requires obedience to the commands. That's what he said in verse 3 and 4. He says, that if you want this relationship, you have to guard the commands. Somebody said, I'm not telling you anything new. I'm refreshing that understanding. Okay? Then when he says, I write you a fresh command, he says, now I want this to be now fresh in your mind. He said, look, he said, I'm writing a fresh command, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light now shines. He said, now that wasn't said necessarily before. This is being said now. I'm trying to point out so that you hear this. The darkness needs to be passing away. The light needs to be shining. You're now aware of something. This is a fresh idea. This is something that's new for you to be thinking about. All right, next.
From Shelley Bell, 1 John 2, verses 9 and 10. I love everyone, but I'm a responder / introvert / yellow white. Can you expound on this for people like me, please? And thank you.
I don't think this has anything to do with any of that. Shelley, I have no idea why you got anything out of it. Verse 9 and 10 have nothing to do with being a responder, an introvert, a yellow white, or any of that stuff. It's simply saying that if you hate your brother, you have a problem. It's not saying you have to go be a socialite. Okay? It's not saying that you have to go and hang out with everybody and spend all kinds of time when you are a responder, introverted person. You cannot like being around a lot of people. You can be introverted. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not the same as hating your brother. Okay? It says nowhere in this command does it say you need to go and be very social. All right? Look, I'm none of those things, and I'm not very social. Some of you might think, really? Come and hang out. I don't like people. No, understand where that's coming from. I don't have the social things to care about anything that you care about unless it's fixing you, helping you, guiding you, instructing you, counseling you. Okay? I just don't have any blue or any of the stuff that would be there for that. So it's not that I don't like people. I have no interest. My interest is only from a leadership point of view. I want you all to get there. Okay? So if you want to hang out and, shoot the breeze and talk and this and that, I have none of that. That doesn't make me an introvert. I'm very extroverted. I just don't have any social interests at all. Okay? And if you ever see me with a group of people and it looks like I'm having such a great time, it's because somebody asked a question and I'm answering it. And then somebody else asked a question and I'm answering that. Okay? There's not really a whole lot of social going on. Okay? If there is, you'll see me like this. And I'll be doing something on my phone because I'm tuned out of whatever social thing is happening. Because I just don't have that. But you're not required to have that. I care about all of you. I was joking when I said I don't like anybody. I'm not interested enough to hear you tell me all about your story or your trip or your this or your that. Because I just don't have that. That's a broken piece. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it's broken. And I watch you guys all interact with each other, and I'm very envious. I watch you, and you sit, and you socialize, and you talk. You're having a great time, and I can't find that rhythm to jump in there and kind of, it's just not me, right? Again, because the part of the color code thing helped you understand where your strengths and your weaknesses are. I just don't have that, okay? I do it unconsciously. What you're seeing is a good performance. She said I do it unconsciously. I said, no, that's just me doing but that's me with effort making it look like I can do it. It's just not something I do. So that's why when a lot of you guys go out to oneg after oneg, so to speak, 10 o'clock at night, you all go to, I almost never go. If I ever go, it's only one reason. Rebbetzin asked me to go. That's true. Ask Elder, he'll tell you. Only reason I ever go is because my wife asked me to go. All right? And so, and knowing full well she's not even going to talk to me, she's going to talk to all of you because she's social. She just wants me to be there. She won't even be sitting anywhere near me with the 20 people at a table, but she wants me to be there. That's her sort of blue thing, right? So just understand, no, this is all about not hating. Okay, not hating. Look, I care about you guys deeply, and you guys know that, and you feel that. That's not the point. The point is that doesn't make me wanting to be social with you, and if I'm not social with you, it has nothing to do with you. I'm not social with anybody. Okay? I really am not. Okay, even ask Uncle Bob. He's my best friend, Shamash Uncle Bob, but even when he comes and hangs out and stays in my house, I don't do a whole lot of social with him necessarily. Okay, I'm just not that way. Okay, and it's not required that you be. All right, next.
From Greg Wallen, Rabbi, am I secondarily, not primarily, responsible for all or certain aspects of my wife's life? Is this responsibility similar to those you are covering, and how to increase shalom in this responsibility?
Yes. The answer to that is all yes. Okay, so yes, you are primarily responsible for yourself, and if you are in an authority position covering others, a parent with children, a husband with a wife, me with all of you, then you have some level of responsibility to do some things. Of course, it depends on the relationship. Okay, me for my wife, I have different responsibilities than me for my children. Some things may be similar, but some things are very different. Me for you guys is different than for my wife and for my children. Some things may be a little similar, but some things are very different. So there is some levels of responsibility, okay? Now that being said, how do you increase shalom in this responsibility? Shalom comes from acceptance. Okay, you have peace when you accept. You have struggle, and then you have peace. When the struggle, when you fight against, when you kick against, when you don't accept. You can have peace in a trial if you accept the trial. If you have consequences, you accept the consequences. See, it's when you fight and struggle against that you have no peace. So my role is very challenging with you. Everybody's role with their spouses is challenging. Everybody's role with their children is challenging. So these are all roles that are challenging. But if you accept that this is still your role, and you have a certain level of responsibility, and even if it's a struggle and everything else, you can still have peace by you not struggling, even though it is a struggle. See, I'm not saying the struggle steals your peace. It's you not accepting the struggle that causes you to lose your peace. You can still have peace. When I got really sick, and you all who saw me, etc., my oxygen levels were bad. I had to be on oxygen. I couldn't hardly move, couldn't hardly walk, couldn't get out of a chair, anything else. I had complete peace because I had no struggle with that struggle. I just didn't struggle with it. I accepted it was what it was. Billy could tell you, he came and saw me. I was at complete peace, no struggle with it. It was a struggle. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't hardly do anything, all right? That being said, because my lungs had shut down. But that being said, though, I had peace. I had shalom. And the reason is because I didn't struggle against the struggle. I accepted it, okay? See, a lot of you want to fight against a limitation that pops up. You want to fight against some sort of adverse situation that pops up. You want to fight against a responsibility that you have that's not easy to deal with, all right? Some of you have spouses that aren't easy to deal with. Husbands, you got wives that are really tough. Still secondarily your responsibility unless you get a divorce. Then it's not your responsibility. But until that happens, and as long as you stay married, you have a responsibility that may not be the simplest thing in the world. But you have to, as long as you accept it and don't fight against it, you can still have peace. Knowing that that is your wife, your choice, your situation, and then you have to just accept that. All right? All right. Hope that answers your question. Greg, next.
Okay, from Jamie. It says, wonderful teaching, Rabbi. When we stray, does repentance and accountability within your heart and your walk replace the sin and guilt offerings mentioned in last night's Torah study?
Okay. Nothing replaces anything, okay? We do have some instruction that explains that when those things don't exist, that these aren't the things he really wanted anyway. What he really wanted you to do was repent, be accountable, and make the change in your heart. Part of the tools and mechanisms to get you there was the sacrificial system. And so they're separate things that were a part of a whole. You were supposed to do all of that when there was a sacrificial system. So having the doing the sin and guilt offerings mentioned last night doesn't change the fact that you needed to repent, be accountable, and do these other things within your heart and in your walk. But there was another step that when there was a temple, we would do. Without a temple, we're doing only this part of it. So one did not replace anything. It's just like when people say, well, we're not doing circumcision of the flesh anymore, it's now about circumcision of the heart. No, it was always both. It was never one or the other. It was always both. Only difference is, with circumcision, you can still do both. With sacrifices, you can only do the part that has to do with the repentance, the accountability, and the heart. You can't do the actual sacrifices because there's no temple. So you do the part you can do, which is the more important part anyway, which is getting your act together and getting your life right and not so much just doing the you know. Because we could have turned the sacrifices into a bunch of Catholic Our Fathers, you know, where you just go to confession, do a couple of whatever rote things they told you to do and think you're good. No, if there's no internal change, there's no point. And so hopefully that answered the question. The children are all coming back, which is good. Right on time here for 5:30. All right, do you got one more as they're kind of getting settled in, or are we good?
Yeah, we're done, Rabbi. That's all of them.
All right, well, I hope that was good for everybody.